Colleagues sabotaged my leadership role, only to struggle without my expertise, while I enjoy watching her flounder in frustration. I'm a teacher at a fairly affluent public school, and for the most part, I absolutely love my job. I've made genuine friends among the staff, and the students make all the hard work truly worth it. Sure, there's all the usual downsides that come with teaching, crummy pay, endless grading in my off hours, but overall, I was happy and life was good. A few years back, my old boss singled me out as someone with leadership potential. He told me I was highly data-driven, great with tech, especially Excel and Google Sheets, and easy to work with. Plus, I excelled at communicating with parents, which goes a long way in education. At first, I hesitated about taking on more responsibility, but I eventually accepted and became a leader of a group of teachers and students. This meant running meetings, tracking overall student success, the whole 9 yards. Not long after, my old boss left, and suddenly I was working under a new boss I barely knew. That's where everything started getting complicated. Here's a personal twist: I've got sensory processing disorder and mild hearing loss. It's tough to describe, but basically, I sometimes just don't hear things the right way. Imagine someone says, "I'm going to pick up Stacy," and what I actually hear is, "I'm gone, just wait and see." This happens to me daily, but I manage as best I can. It's not curable. Early on, my new boss fixated on strategies where we'd focus extra attention on students who almost passed the state tests, a legal gray area, as I'd later find out. These initiatives were always verbal and never put in writing. Every meeting, I'd need to ask her afterward to clarify and double-check my notes. I could sense her frustration toward me growing, even though I told her repeatedly about my hearing issues. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if she felt I was making waves or, worse, drawing attention to our borderline practices. That's when the main player in my story enters. Let's call her Tenny, since she's the tennis team coach. Tenny is beloved among staff for her years of service in the community. I liked her too, she seemed like she'd be a solid team member. But like my boss, Tenny quickly grew irritated when I didn't catch what she said, especially in noisy hallways. Often, she'd just shout something as she breezed past, and if I didn't catch it, there'd be consequences. I asked her again and again to slow down for a second or just shoot me an email, but she never changed. There were at least half a dozen major situations that could have been avoided had she just emailed, but that never happened. One situation sums it up perfectly. My new boss came into the hall to announce a last-minute assembly location change. I heard something about a change, but missed the new location entirely. Tenny was nearby, so I tapped my ear, my usual signal that I didn't hear, and asked where we were supposed to go. She rattled off something as she walked away, and once again, I didn't get it. The result? Me and my students wandered the building and entered the assembly 5 minutes late, totally confused. When my new boss asked what happened, I simply told her I didn't hear correctly. Weeks later, I got called into my boss's office. She told me I would be removed from my leader position for inconsistency and disrespect toward colleagues. When I pressed for details, she told me which colleagues complained was confidential. I asked what I did that was disrespectful, and she said that sometimes you get frustrated when you say you can't hear things and tap your ear. I explained that's the ASL sign for hear, basically, me saying, "I can't hear you." She told me I should have explained that. I mentioned, again, that I've always asked for written communication. She shot back that I shouldn't expect it all the time. It was clear nothing I said would matter, any explanation was just batted away. I loved this school. It stung to realize that fighting harder would only create new problems, so I stepped back. I shouldn't have been surprised when a school-wide email went out announcing that Tenny had been promoted to the leader position I'd just lost. Replies rolled in, praising her, and I watched, knowing in my gut that she'd been the one to complain. It was bitter seeing her celebrated for it. The next school year arrived. Tenny appeared in my room and asked for the custom Google Sheets student data trackers I'd built. I told her truthfully that, even if I just shared access, she wouldn't be able to do much without knowing the system behind them. I invited her over to my computer and walked her through the complex formulas and steps, how every time a student or class was added, I had to reconfigure various settings. Then Tenny asked if I could just keep updating the sheets for her, even though I wasn't the leader anymore. I responded as professionally as possible and said I'd love to teach her how to maintain them, but I'd need a stipend for the extra work. She wanted to know if any of the other leaders did what I did. Nope. It was always just me, and I'd never gotten extra help. I'm a little ashamed at how much satisfaction I felt watching Tenny's face go cold the moment she realized she was on her own, with nothing to do but spend countless hours wrestling with Excel herself, or finally learn the skills I'd mastered. Then there were the parents. Most are fantastic, the kind who truly care about their kids, and it's a pleasure to work with them. But that 1% make your life absolute hell. I overheard Tenny more than once complaining about a marathon phone call with a problem parent that wiped out her entire grading period. Where those calls took her 45 minutes, I could have wrapped them up in 5. Years of practice had taught me to diffuse heated conversations and get parents on my side quickly. For me, a 5-minute call. For Tenny? Hours in purgatory. So now Tenny's collecting my old $1,500 stipend, but she's also getting all the miscommunication, extra meetings, challenging parents, late nights, confusion, everything I had to shoulder alone. I'm not proud to admit I take pleasure in it, but Tenny made my life a nightmare in a place I otherwise felt at home. Have fun, Tenny. Update 1. It's been an entire semester since everything changed, and reflecting on it now, I can barely believe how much has shifted in my life. Before, the mental weight of my leadership position felt insurmountable, absolutely not worth the small $1.5K stipend I received each year. But once I finally let it go, it was as if I could breathe for the first time in ages. I feel lighter, more present, and I've found myself channeling so much of that reclaimed energy into the community projects that matter to me. For the first time in years, I haven't taken a single piece of work home this entire semester. It's made me feel like the teacher I always wanted to be, invested, connected, and genuinely happier in my role. Meanwhile, Tenny's experience has been the polar opposite. Every day, she's among the last to leave school, even during her coaching off-season, and she's started to unravel under the pressure. Meetings get cancelled or double booked, and her forgetfulness is now common. Worse, she hasn't made any effort to support my hearing accommodation, even though it's now officially registered with the district. I compensate by taking my own notes and running them by a trusted colleague to make sure I caught everything, usually missing just a thing or two. Then, out of the blue, our boss called a staff-wide meeting and rolled out a new practice: shared meeting documents and calendar schedules for all teams. Tenny looked outraged, which struck me as ironic, since this kind of organization is basic professionalism, and exactly what I'd been championing in leadership before she ever took over. There was another curveball after my original post. I found out from a trusted colleague that Tenny and 2 teachers, one of whom I'll call Ben, were the ones who reported my supposed lack of preparation and inconsistencies to our boss. Since learning of their betrayal, I've played it cool, keeping things professional and friendly, never letting on that I know what they did. Here's an added twist: both Tenny and Ben teach English, just like I do. If you know anything about education, you know English is one of the most heavily tested subjects, and at our school, state test scores are practically a mantra. With the new luxury of time and a clear head, I committed myself to finding and applying new strategies, aiming to get my students' scores as high as possible. I read up on the latest research, adapted new exercises, and poured my heart into my classroom. The payoff came at a full staff meeting. My boss announced that our grades English scores had climbed significantly, an impressive 20% increase over last year's results. Then came the moment that shifted the whole room. Be sure to check your students' individual scores to see how you contributed to the increase, she said. And there it was, my students' scores had driven that improvement, while Tenny's and Ben's had actually dipped below last year's marks. My boss congratulated me privately, and my job reviews are now the strongest they've ever been. In the most ironic twist yet, my boss asked if I'd be willing to share my strategies with Tenny and Ben. I agreed. Of course, it's professional courtesy in teaching, but only handed over the documents, nothing more. Neither of them has reached out for more details, which suits me just fine. What makes it all even sweeter is this: because of district funding cuts, the leadership position is being entirely eliminated next year, and our teams are dissolving. Tenny endured all that stress, all that drama, for a job that's now vanishing after a single year. I'm trying not to let myself dwell on the karma of it all, instead focusing on my personal growth and the overwhelming support I feel from the 95% of my colleagues who appreciate my presence. My students are thriving. I am, too. Update 2. The district sent out a compliance sweep in January. Nothing dramatic, the usual request for evidence of interventions, logs of parent outreach, documentation of how services are selected. It was the kind of thing that used to give me a stomachache when everything lived in people's heads and hallway whispers. This time, it was almost peaceful. I had clean notes, clear emails, and a tidy little workflow that lived in our shared drives. Tenny, meanwhile, went into a frenzy. She started popping into rooms to ask people to send over whatever you've got and just copy me on all the parent stuff so I can show something. She even emailed me asking if I still had my old trackers and whether I could backfill the logs with what we did last fall. I told her I could meet to show her how to build a tracker and what fields the district wanted, but I couldn't fabricate anything. She replied with a smiley face and nothing else. 2 days later, our boss sent a whole staff reminder that verbal initiatives are not an acceptable record. If emails could smirk, that one did. Around the same time, my formal accommodation finally became more than a polite nod. HR looped in our admin team and codified some painfully obvious practices: agendas posted at least a day ahead, action items captured in a shared doc, changes to student movement and writing. Not optional anymore. The first week it rolled out, we had a pep rally location change 10 minutes before the bell. I didn't catch the hallway announcement, shocking, I know, but 10 seconds later the assistant principal dropped the new spot in our team's channel like the plan laid out. My class walked straight there. Tenny's didn't. They drifted, double-backed, and eventually arrived with a little parade of confused faces. I kept my mouth shut. The AP didn't, and the next week every last-minute change came with a written blast and a timestamp. It's wild how quickly chaos evaporates when people put things in writing. The data piece kept paying off in other ways. Our district's literacy director, my old boss, who left before this whole saga, popped into my room on an instructional round. He didn't say much during the lesson, just stood in the corner watching my kids run a peer review protocol we've been refining all year. After school, he sent one line: keep doing exactly this. A week later, I got an email asking if I'd present my approach to parent communication and short cycle feedback at a February PD. Small stipend attached, clear time, clear agenda, no gray area. I said yes. Penny and Ben were listed as attendees. Ben came and took notes in the back. Penny registered and no-showed, then emailed me asking if I could catch her up on the highlights sometime this week. I sent her the slide deck and said I was happy to walk through it if she set a time and sent her questions in advance. She never replied. The audit had another ripple. For years, we'd had that quiet focus on the kids just under the cut score push. The district put language in writing, no more selective rosters unless they were tied to actual needs and documented services. In other words, support everyone who needs it and be able to prove it. Our boss rolled it out as a clarification, but everyone knew what it was. Penny, who had been running those lists by feel, suddenly had to show how she chose student X instead of student Y and what was actually done for them beyond a quick pullout before a test. Without that shortcut, she looked lost. Our meetings got calmer. The room got quieter. I could hear. On the English front, the universe kept doubling down. The district posted growth data and my classes were flagged for exceeding expected gains. Ben's were flat, Tenny's were just below average. Admin asked if I'd be willing to host 2 coaching cycles for our team this spring. Again, clear expectations, paid hours, actual time carved out, not a vague give us your stuff. I agreed. Ben sat in, tried a couple of the protocols, and emailed me afterward that his kids turned in the cleanest essays he'd seen all year. Penny canceled her first cycle because of athletics conflicts, then rescheduled, then canceled again. She looked tired in a way that makes you stop feeling triumphant and start feeling human. Coaching season didn't help her. She forgot to submit eligibility checks on time, and 2 of her starters were benched until grades were verified. One of the dads is a lawyer who's been around the PTA for years. The email thread made its way to admin, then to HR, and then, somehow, to an all-staff reminder titled Timelines or Equity. You could feel the temperature shift for her after that. Less deference. More, did you put it in the doc? There was one moment I didn't expect. After another messy afternoon where she tried to run scheduling in the hallway and 3 classes ended up in the wrong lab, she came to my door with a coffee and asked if I could sit down with her after school to rebuild the sheet I showed her in August. Not for me to do it, she said, she wanted to learn how to maintain it without breaking it. She asked if we could do it with captions on and no interruptions, and she offered to send her questions beforehand. I don't know if it was humility or just exhaustion, but it read honest. We met the next day. I showed her how to lock ranges, how to use dropdowns so no one fat fingers formulas, how to pull a tidy parent log from a messy sheet. She took notes in a shared doc and kept repeating, "Oh, that's why it kept doing that." It wasn't an apology, but it was 3 steps toward one. The very last curveball, the district opened a summer pilot for a data and literacy cohort. Teachers who run a classroom during the year, then help other schools build out systems for the first 6 weeks of next fall. It's essentially the work I was doing before, minus the politics and with the parts I'm good at actually valued. My old boss's name was on the application. I applied. 2 days later, he stopped me in the hall and said, "I'd like you on it if you still want it." I said yes. He smiled. It comes with a stipend that won't make you laugh. As for the leader role, it's gone in June just like they said. No more stipends, no more titles. Tenny will go back to being just Tenny, and I'll still be in my room at 8:05, asking teenagers to explain their thinking and backing away when they don't need me. I'm not naive, schools don't magically fix themselves, but I've stopped bracing for impact every time someone calls a meeting. I've got systems that protect my brain, a district that's finally putting things in writing, and kids who keep proving that clarity beats charisma every time. Update 3. The summer pilot wasn't smoke and mirrors. 2 days after graduation caps hit the gym floor, I was in a conference room at a different campus with 5 teachers and a counselor who all started the meeting with some version of, "We've always just talked it out." We built their skeleton in a morning, clean rosters, a log that actually totals and timestamps itself, a parent contact sheet that spits out a weekly summary without anyone doing math on a sticky note. By the end of the week, they stopped asking if we could just do it later and started dropping questions in a shared doc at night while they graded summer school essays. It was quiet work and it didn't make anyone clap, but it felt like oxygen. The stipend landed in my account on the day they said it would. It didn't make me laugh. Back at my school, the leader role vanished on schedule. There wasn't any ceremony, just a line in an email about streamlining teams and a new org chart with fewer boxes. Penny turned in her keys to the storage closet she'd been using as a war room and moved a tower of spiral notebooks back to her classroom. That same week, our principal sent a whole staff note announcing she'd accepted a position at the central office to support district initiatives. No one pretended it was a promotion. An interim arrived 2 days later with a legal pad, a calm voice, and a habit of ending sentences with, "Put it in the doc so we don't forget." He'd been an AP at a neighboring school and knew half our kids by their siblings. In the first staff meeting he said we would pick one platform for calendars and agendas and actually use it. No more shadow spreadsheets, no hallway events planning. It sounded so simple it almost felt radical. The district invested in tech that actually solved my daily problem instead of asking me to solve it myself. The IT techs rolled a little black microphone card into our library and showed us how live captions in Teams aren't just for PDs, they work in quick stand-ups and department meetings, too. I got a classroom soundfield system with a lapel mic that makes it feel like everyone is speaking at the same level instead of me trying to lip read across rows while the HVAC roars. The first time the interim tossed a last-minute change into the channel and the captions caught it perfectly, 3 teachers turned to me at once and said, "You good?" I was. The universe, which apparently loves a theme, kept threading old and new together. The state flagged a handful of our school's testing practices, the kind that live in the gray between helping and nudging, for an extra look. No scandals, no headlines, just a polite but pointed request to submit how students were selected for last-minute test prep supports and what those supports actually looked like. Our interim called it what it was, an audit of habits. For people with nothing to show but memory and intentions, it was brutal. Penny spent a morning in the copy room scanning through last fall's planner, trying to reconstruct who she pulled and when. She came by my door with a stack of loose papers and asked if there was any way to pull a log from our email threads. There was. We ran a search by subject and built a minimalist timeline. It wasn't pretty, but it wasn't empty. She exhaled like someone had been holding her shoulder blades for months. Pre-service week surprised me. The literacy director, my old boss, asked if I'd co-facilitate a half-day on systems that save you instructional time. It was in the auditorium, not crammed into a classroom after school with people clinging to coffee like it was life support. Clear agenda, clear deliverables, people with laptops open following along while we built things in real time. Ben sat in the second row, typed like a court reporter, and at the end said, "Can you come watch period 3 next week? I think I'm missing something in my peer feedback." Penny sat on the aisle, took notes in a composition book, and didn't look away when I demonstrated the parent call script that turns a 40-minute blizzard into a 5-minute phone call. After the session, she waited until everyone else drifted out and said, "I was wrong about you." Not a big speech. 4 words, soft. She asked if I could meet with her and one of the newer English teachers to set up the exact same sheets we'd built in August, this time with protections and automation so they couldn't accidentally blow up the formulas. She wrote out her questions beforehand, sent them 2 days early, and asked if we could sit in the conference room where the AC doesn't scream. We did. It was what I wish last year had been allowed to be. Then the district board meeting did the thing I try not to think about because it feels too much like a popularity contest. They recognized teachers whose students' growth data exceeded projections across subgroups. I wore the same gray blazer I've had for years and stood in a line under bright lights while parents clapped and kids held programs on their laps like tickets for a show. The PTA president, the lawyer dad from the eligibility mess, came up after and said, "Thank you for answering my email the first time." It was a small sentence that landed big. Penny caught my eye across the room and gave a little 2-finger salute that made me laugh in spite of myself. Classroom life felt like what teaching is supposed to feel like. I piloted a short-cycle writing intervention I'd been tinkering with, and by October my kids were giving each other feedback without me having to hover. Ben borrowed the protocol and sent me a screen grab of his kids' rubric averages trending up across 3 weeks like a slow elevator. He's the kind of person who says thank you in complete sentences and means it. Our interim started popping into rooms without a clipboard, staying 10 minutes, and leaving a sticky note that said one specific thing he saw that worked. Mine said, "Your wait time is a gift." I taped it near my desk where kids can see it. Not everything softened. The state's request turned into a formal letter of concern for a handful of people who couldn't produce documentation, the professional version of a wrist slap that still ends up in a file. No one was marched out. What changed was the air in the building, less improvisation, more send it. When athletic season came around, eligibility checks turned into a shared workflow with a due date that actually notified people who missed it. Penny missed the first one by an hour and no one waved it off. 2 players sat until the next check posted. She didn't argue. She put the next 3 dates in her phone with alarms and asked the registrar how to run the report herself. I picked up a 0-2 release to serve as a campus data and literacy lead, 2 periods a day where I'm not fighting a copier but sitting with teams to build the bones they can keep, and then I go back to my room and teach teenagers to build arguments that hold. It's the part of the work I loved without the window dressing that almost ate me. My old boss stopped by one afternoon and stood in the back while my kids debated whether a character's decision made sense within the constraints of his world. When the bell rang, he just nodded and said, "Still exactly this. We're not a fairy tale. People still send last-minute emails and forget attachments. The HVAC still roars. Kids still show up without pens and with problems that don't fit in any form. But the hallway chaos is muted. The meetings have captions. My accommodation isn't a favor, it's part of how we do business. Penny sends me links instead of whispers. Sometimes I send a thumbs-up reaction and nothing else. Sometimes she catches my eye in the afternoon and says, "I put it in the doc. We're fine." The strangest day happened last week. Our interim called 6 of us into the library for a quick check-in that turned out to be a visit from 2 folks at the State Department who wanted to see schools that had moved from personality-based leadership to systems. They asked questions that didn't fish for drama. What did you stop doing? How do you know who needs what? And listened to answers without trying to fix them mid-sentence. At the end, one of them asked if I'd be willing to share the parent communication sequence at a regional session in January. Paid, with subs covered and a template packet everyone can copy without breaking anything. I said yes. On my way back to class, I passed Tenny in the hall. She was carrying a bucket of tennis balls and a stack of essays. "Hey," she said, "I tried your 3-line call last night. 9 minutes start to finish." He thanked me at the end. She looked like a person who had slept. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, because schools are messy and the universe loves a plot twist, but for now, the only crazy thing is how normal everything feels when the basics are sturdy. I hear what I need to hear. The kids keep pushing past where the projections said they'd stall. The systems hum without a hero at the center. It's not glamorous, but it's good. And that's enough. Update 4. The regional session in January didn't feel like a roadshow. It felt like handing people a wrench and watching them fix the sink that's been dripping into a bucket for years. Subs showed up on time. The room had mics and captions that actually worked. I walked through the parent sequence and the 10-minute feedback loop we built, then stopped talking and let people build it on their own screens. A middle school team from 2 towns over kept glancing at each other and whispering, then one of them raised a hand and said, "What do you do when the parent picks up hot?" I told them exactly what I do. Penny sat 2 rows back, underlining on a printout like she was going to have to defend it in court. On the way out, a principal from a rural campus asked if we'd be willing to pilot the call script with them this spring. "We don't need it to be pretty," she said. "We need it to work." I said I'd help. 3 weeks later, our district learned what pretty doesn't matter means. A Monday morning, first bell, and the network didn't just hiccup. It went dark. Sys, email, Teams, phones, everything that lives on a wire just spun and blinked like it had decided to take a snow day. The intercom crackled with an apology and an ask to hold tight while IT investigates. Attendance was suddenly a stack of empty boxes. The caption belt got cut. You could feel the old muscles twitch, everyone ready to default to shouting directions in the hallway. Our interim didn't. He walked into the front office, grabbed a dry erase marker, and wrote the day's schedule on a board like it was 1999. "Send runners," he told secretaries, "and if it changes, we erase it and write it again." He handed everyone paper attendance slips like raffle tickets. "If you have a plan, use it. If you don't, steal one." He looked at me. "Can you print what you can?" I've been exporting a weekly CSV of rosters ever since the compliance sweep, the kind of habit that makes your past self feel prophetic. I had a thumb drive in my desk with last Friday's everything. The library copier groaned, but it moved. Hearing without captions is not my favorite trick. I taped a single-page agenda to my door before first period and told kids, "If it changes, I'll write it here." I asked colleagues to face me and not talk to the floor. It sounds like kindergarten, but it kept my stomach from climbing my throat. Ben stuck his head in between classes and said, "I'll send a runner if anything shifts." He meant it. A junior who usually tries to nap through anything that isn't a basketball game posted up in my back row and took on the role of human captioner. When I missed a hallway announcement, he grabbed a pass and came back with a sticky note that said, "Lab be closed, go to C." It wasn't elegant, but it was clean. Penny surprised me. She wasn't pacing, she was organized. She had a legal pad, not 1,000 post-its. She used the 3-line call script with a stack of numbers pulled from the emergency cards and knocked out 9 parent contacts in half an hour without the crutch of canned emails. I watched her write down, "Left message at 10:12. Hitting the times like she knew someone might need to reconstruct it later. At lunch, she handed me a printout from the roster export I made and said, quietly, "Thank you." Not performative. Useful. The day creaked by. We took attendance with pencils and slips. We changed a pep rally plan by erasing gym and writing auditorium and sending 2 11th graders down the English hall to say it out loud. The interim stood by the dry erase board in the office and didn't pretend it wasn't ridiculous, he just made it work. When the network limped back a day and a half later, the relief was physical. IT told us it had been a security event with words like containment and restore from backup. No one needed the details. We had felt what reliance feels like when the thing you rely on bleeds out. Because apparently we can't resist turning a bruise into a worksheet, the interim asked if I'd write an offline playbook for when, not if, systems go down. Not a glossy binder that no one reads. Something anyone could use at 7:58 when the little spinning wheel won't stop spinning. We built it in 2 afternoons, 1 sheet for attendance with a block to timestamp phone calls, 1 parent log with lines you could fill with a pen, 1 page of if/then for moving humans when email's dead. He ran off a set on colored paper so it wouldn't get lost in the copy room detritus, stuck it in everyone's mailbox, and said, "Tape it to the inside of your cabinet and hope it collects dust." There was another piece of theater that didn't mean to be theater. Central Office pushed out a required training module titled Assessment Integrity and Documentation. I clicked, and our former principal's face filled the frame. She read talking points about transparency and paper trails and why verbal initiatives have no place in test prep. I watched it with my door open while a couple of kids ate lunch on the floor and tried not to let irony twist into something mean. The module ended with a bright slide that said, "If it isn't in writing, it didn't happen." Someone somewhere has a sense of humor. The spring run hissed along instead of roaring. The rural campus from the session circled back after trying the phone script and asked if we'd share the templates for the parent summary. We did. Ben invited me into period 3, and I watched him run the peer feedback like he'd been doing it all year. Timers tight, kids actually listening, not just waiting to talk. He sent a thank you that wasn't 3 words, it was 3 paragraphs. Tenny showed up to my room with 2 comp books and a junior English teacher named Maya and said, "Can we do the sheet again? The right way?" We sat in the conference room where the AC doesn't scream and made something that won't explode when someone fat fingers a range. Tenny asked questions that assumed she'd be the one answering them next week. The crazy part, the part that would have read like fiction to me a year ago, showed up as a nomination letter. Our campus does a low-key Teacher of the Year where staff submit names and admin pulls a handful of letters to the board. I only saw mine because the interim asked if he could share it with the team that wrote our PD. It was from Tenny. Not a flowery apology, not even a rehash. Specific. She wrote about the first time she sent a last-minute change with a timestamp instead of a shout, about the 9-minute call where the parent said, "Thank you," about watching my kids run a protocol without me hovering. She wrote about captions. "It is a professional kindness to put things in writing," she wrote, and then she underlined it. I read it with my door closed and sat for a while before I hit reply. You don't unspool everything with one letter. You do mark the place you're standing. The board did the recognition at a meeting that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. They called our names, and people clap the way people clap when something rings true without needing a speech. The lawyer dad shook my hand and said, "Your email footer has every number I need. Bless you." My old boss, the literacy director, stopped me by the cookies and said, "I told them we built the plane and then you taught people to fly it." He keeps speaking in metaphors and I keep letting him because the alternative is administrative jargon. By May, the interim wasn't interim anymore. The board took the acting office title after a perfunctory search with 3 finalists and a survey where people didn't mince words. First staff meeting with the new permanent nameplate, he stood by the same dry erase board from the outage and said, "Our superpower is boring. We do what we say we'll do, and we write it down." Then he threw the mic pack to me and said, "Show them the offline pack lives on paper and in the cloud." I showed, and then I went back to teaching comma splices to kids who think commas are vibes. The tennis season ended the way all seasons do, awkward banquets with cheap lemonade and kids who grew 3 inches. Tenny turned in her rackets and her eligibility binder and didn't lose a single kid to a missed deadline after that first slap. She sent me a link to the updated shared calendar with practice times that didn't overlap with tutoring. She knows I saw it. She knows I noticed she sent it instead of saying it to the air. The last small scene landed in my room on a Tuesday where the HVAC acted like a jet engine and I was half thinking about the stack of timed essays waiting for me after dinner. A freshman came by to make up a quiz during lunch. He's one of Tenny's players, the kind who fidgets through everything and only sits still when you hand him a pencil and a purpose. He finished early and stood at my desk like kids do when they're building the courage to say a thing. Coach said if I had thoughts, I should write them instead of talking over people, he said. Then he handed me a page that started with, "Here is my thought." It was a messy paragraph with a spine. He thanked me for calling his mom the week we moved his seat. She said you didn't waste her time. 9 minutes buys you a lot of runway. I keep waiting for the wheel to come off again. Schools are alive. They clatter. But the noise feels like a cafeteria, not a train yard. The captioning is on when it can be. The board exists when it can't. The put it in the doc has a paper cousin that sits in a cabinet where anyone can find it without asking permission. Tenny writes, I read. Sometimes it's a scheduling note. Sometimes it's a 2-line email that says, "Thanks." Sometimes it's nothing, and the silence is the nicest part. The systems hum without a hero, and if the lights go out, we can still see our feet. That's not glamorous. It's steady. I'll take it.